Good day, evening, morning, and afternoon, folks. This is Chris Trevia, Director of Compliance and Training with Redwood Family Care Network, welcoming you to this training on SIRs. What we're talking about today is SIR triage training. Will be an approach on how to document, report, investigate, narrate, understand, and plan for events to keep your operations safe, your residents safe, and be in compliance with regulatory compliances regarding special incidents, mandated reporting, abuse and neglect reporting in the state of California. A little bit about myself. Long story short, I've been in the field for over 20 years, working with developmental services in different capacities at the regional center with other providers, most recently now with People's Care and Redwood Family Care Network. In the past life, I was an educator for middle school students, working with also special needs as well at that time. Very happy to be here with you guys today to go over this very important topic that it's important for everyone to have mastery of in order to have ownership of the responsibilities and roles that come with your title of administrator, program manager, supervisor, house lead, or house manager in your respective location. Let me start by telling you this. If you haven't heard this, I'm telling you this now. SIRs, special incidents, they're preventable. And they're preventable in as much as you can truly plan for risk management and take concrete actions to ensure safety, compliance, and sound practices in your operation, ultimately for the benefit of the individuals you're entrusted to care for. Adopting this mantra, this mindset, is going to allow you to take ownership, because otherwise, all you're really going to end up doing without adopting this mindset, what you are actively doing is you're going to be embracing excuses. And you're going to embrace the excuses to then justify poor choices, poor planning, poor execution of policies and procedures, and ultimately poor results, poor outcomes to the detriment of our individuals. We can't do that. So in today's presentation, we'll go over SIR reporting standard practices, best practices. We'll be looking at the big operating six of SIRs, or BOSS. We'll be looking at the response plan of who you're going to call when you have a BOSS event that comes up. We're going to talk about cases of suspected abuse and neglect and protocols there. We'll look at timelines for reporting according to Title 17 and 22. We'll also talk about documenting the SIR, the report itself. And ultimately, we'll end with a conversation about the SIR triage model. Reporting standard practices. When it comes to documenting and reporting an event, it's always important to make sure that in your communication, in your narrative, and in what you write down ultimately on your report, you are addressing the root causes, the consequences, the events, and the people involved in the event. So you're answering fundamentally the questions of who, what, where, how, when, and why. If you do that, you are maintaining compliance per the law in regards to narrating, reporting verbally, and documenting and reporting in a written format the circumstances surrounding your special incident report event. Now, there are four kind of basic principles that govern the reporting process, and I'm going to go over them here briefly. All of them always go over the who, what, where, how, when, and why. The first one is take immediate action. So you're not doing any reporting of any kind. You are addressing the situation that has evolved in your operation. You are maintaining health and safety as an operational priority. You're giving relief where care is needed or assistance is needed. You are prioritizing levels of care based on who is affected with the circumstance that has played itself out, and you're giving support where needed and lining up resources to get the support in place to bring the event to a successful as can be result. So you take immediate action. That is the first step. The second, once you've addressed the situation as evolving in your location, you are to then start the fact-finding mission that will determine your decisions as management in terms of leaning in to coach, support your staff, retrain, Address the factors that played a role in the event. Address the different shortfalls or stopgaps that played a role in creating the challenge in the event, and at the same time collecting all the essential information of who, what, where, how, when, and why that will help you document the report of the event with accuracy, integrity, honesty, and clarity. Number 3, analyze and reflect. As a leader, you are always assessing. You're always analyzing the events that have transpired, especially in SIR. And it should be done in the moment, following the event, and it should be done sometime shortly thereafter the event, and continuously following any event. Because if it's happened once in an operation, it can certainly happen again. And because of that, you need to determine how and why it happened. How and why are so important for preparing an operation to build resilience, to mitigate risks, to manage risks, and at the same time ensure health and safety of your staff, your residents, and yourself in any given situation. So analyze and reflect, so important. And number 4, and the hidden step between 3 and 4 is you've written out the event, you've written out your plan of intervention, you've written out the different factors, you've got all the facts, so you formalize that into a plan of correction and action. That's final, number 4. Because whenever you report something to a regulatory agency, one of the key components of any special incident report, and I don't care if you're at Alta Regional Center, San Gabriel Pomona Regional Center, West Side, North LA, San Diego, all reports, whether they have their own report or they accept the THERA report, all of them have to have an instrumental piece that's called follow-up. And it is expected of you as a provider to give and articulate, a method or a stratagem or a plan by which you are going to ensure that this event, if it does occur in some form again, it is planned for, prepared for, and the hazard and jeopardy that incident may occur or present to the resident or to the home is mitigated. We're talking about risk management. We're not talking about risk elimination. We're talking about managing the risk to prevent adverse situations from happening to the people that we're responsible to care for in our operations. So when you establish a corrective action plan, you need to talk about who's doing what, who's responsible for what is going to be done, by when is it going to be done, where is this going to be happening, how is this plan going to be carried across, and more importantly, the why. You have to anchor it in the why this plan has to be carried out exactly. And a note to administrator managers and supervisors and leaders, give your employees the why of a procedure. If you give your employees the why of a procedure, it allows them to take ownership of the process, contribute to the process, and build a better result. Because what is true of a special incident report or a special incident event, you may have had little control leading up into the immediate occurrence of it, but once it is happening, once it is really evolving in your location, as a leader, you are in control at that moment of crisis. You're not out of control. At that moment, you are in your most control. Because the decisions, the choices, and the things that you communicate and express to your team will have real-time consequences that you will have to deal with at the end of that continuum cycle of that event. So tread accordingly, plan ahead, have a plan, period. So what are the big operating 6 of SIRs? Not the sinister 6 that, in this case, poor Spider-Man is afraid of. Don't be Spider-Man here. You're going to be strong Spider-Man. You're going to be leaders. But what are the big operating 6 of SIR, or the boss, what I call boss? Well, the big 6 are the following. Death, anything related to death, because it's definitive. And it merits a high-level follow-up from every department involved in that person's life. Medication errors have huge consequences and adverse effects to the health and safety of our residency or our participants. Please have plans to protect, mitigate, and restrict staff from going off plan and causing medication errors. Elopement and missing person. Again, a major event that can have very dire consequences for an individual due to safety concerns, traffic safety, traffic events, accidents, things of the nature that can lead to death as well, because these are the incidents that you have to plan for and prepare for. Change of condition. This includes any medical issues that may have arisen suddenly or been an active dormant medical condition that now is active. This will also include COVID-19 or the onset of unexplained seizures for whatever reason. All are critical factors that have adverse conditions be present for the individual served. Number 5, injury or accident that goes beyond first aid and CPR. So anytime your residency has to go to the ER, there at some point there was an injury or an accident that occurred that has aggravated or has created an injury or aggravated a situation that requires medical care immediately. That is a big time effect because there's a lot of things and elements that go into addressing that need and correcting it. But there's also a lot of things that went into how that injury or accident occurred. And lastly, suspected abuse or neglect. That is mental, physical, sexual, or fiduciary or financial. Again, those 6 events are among the biggest 6 that can have the highest level of impact on the quality of life of the residency of the participants for which you provide care for, supervision, or support in the home or in the community. So it behooves you as leadership to take ownership of your operations to plan against these 6 events. So who are you going to call? Well, you don't panic. You don't call Ghostbusters. You're not going to necessarily call the leadership at corporate office. You're going to do something very definitive. And that is, first and foremost, you're going to stay calm. I cannot stress to you the importance of the first part of that first bullet point. Events happen. Adverse situations occur. Crises will occur. Emergencies happen. But you need to stay resolute, firm, approachable, relatable, effective, and all those things, but above all, calm in leading your team through that crisis. And your first life-saving support should always be your district manager. As an administrator, program manager, house lead supervisor, again, you go up the chain, but it should be district manager is the first external party outside of the management structure of that location that should be the first call. Because they are the person that can bring the most resources to bear into the location to help bring that event to a closure. Maybe your district manager is on vacation or is off or whatever, but you may need to, in that case, engage with your regional manager. This is precisely why Redwood has activated regional management. You have a layer upon layer of support to help you maximize successful outcomes. Additionally, you have behavioral and medical consultants that may accompany your service model of your program or location. You need to loop them in and activate those as necessary. Additionally, consider involving the compliance and training department. We stand to serve you guys and advocate and as well as educate and provide you guys resources that will help you operate based on best practices, avoid and mitigate risks, and allow you to know that a support is there in times of crisis, in times of adverse events, such as any of the 6 listed previously, or any event that you may recently have experienced. Now, as a boss, you take ownership, so you also have to begin to gather all necessary information for the reporting and the documentation of that special incident. You have to kind of do all those things in real time, very quickly. And you're not going to be able to do any of those if you do not stay calm. So again, stay calm. I'm going to briefly talk about cases of suspected abuse or neglect. Unfortunately, we are living in an endemic COVID-19 situation where a lot of things that may have been hidden under the surface for the latter 2.5 years are now bubbling up to the surface, and regulatory agencies are alerting us that concerning trends of undiscovered or now discovered trends and habits of abuse, possible abuse or neglect that are being discovered out in the field are coming to light. And it's really unfortunate because one of the most adversely affected, it seems to be, continues to be our individuals of the development disabled community. I must tell you that as a leader to leader, talking to you leader to leader, the kind of culture that you allow in your home by making or not making decisions to improve your operations can create conditions that are either an impediment or an assistant to establishing a culture of neglect and abuse in your home. Again, the choices that you choose to make or walk away from and not make will establish a culture in the home to take root that will either define itself as a culture of abuse and neglect, or define itself as a culture of good enough for me and all those great things we want it to be. But it begins with you. So what's the plan? Your resident comes up to you, tells you, hey, this has been going on. So-and-so has been doing such and such. Another staff, maybe a new staff who just started, saw something weird from a veteran staff, has told you, couldn't help but tell you before their shift was over, from their cell phone as soon as they got in their car, but they didn't want to do it while they were on shift. Or a veteran staff tells you, you know what, I've noticed such and such. An outside guest operator that you had to come in to do a repair saw something and couldn't help but call you directly. A behaviorist noticed something. Someone tells you along the point that there's a suspicion of abuse or neglect. So what do? Well, we're going to use this tool here about prioritizing choices to find out what we have to do now, what we have to do next, what we do later, and what we ignore. So what do you do now? You're going to ensure your individual's health and safety first. If they're around a person that is suspected to have been employed in abusive or neglectful activities around that person, you got to separate those people. You got to keep the individual safe. If you need to work with your district manager and HR to place that employee on administrative leave of some kind, so be it. Do it in the proper way, using the proper channels, proper paperwork, proper process. But immediately start gathering information on that event. And then establish an SIR team, and establish with that SIR team, which is typically you and your DM and anyone else that might be involved, find out and enumerate who's going to do what next, what party is going to do what next, so that by the time you get to do next, you have a plan. So do next. You begin the reporting and notification process with the team and everyone that is involved with that individual, so that everyone is made aware that something adverse, something occurred. Okay. You then begin the reporting and documentation process with members of the team's input, your DM, clinician, anyone else that you looped in, to make sure your report is accurate, has integrity, is truthful, is not concealing anything, but only gives the information that is required of who, what, where, when, how, without going into conjecture, opinions, or feelings, just straight facts and reflective of basically the information that you obtained from the team as part of your reporting process. Make sure that you do these later then, not in the middle of it, because it'll only be distractions. Later, compile additional records related to the SIR. This order may come from your district manager or from the training department to make sure you have everything you need to anticipate an investigation, more than likely. You then schedule proposed follow-up trainings with yourself, your management, your teams, with input from your DM, your regional, and other parties present, to lay out a kind of a response in educating yourself and your team with best practices. What you're going to ignore will always be the opinions, the emotions, playing the blame game, and engaging in gossip in regards to this event, because that adds no value and only creates more liabilities if you go into these time-wasting activities. What you will not do, and I cannot stress this information enough, as a leader, you have to walk with integrity. And that goes with special incident reporting of all kinds. You will not coach any employees on any version or story of the events or the incident. The narrative of the event is the narrative of the event. What it is what it is. What happened is what happened. Facts only, not feelings. You will not run a concurrent investigation with licensing, regional center, or disability rights. Once they are involved, that's it. Your involvement's done. Your only recourse here is to call the employee once they tell you they can come back, or if they request information, to facilitate that information. That's it. You can, and if they ask you, you can establish that you get fact finding to do the report, but that was it. So that way they know that you're not running into interference or willful obstruction from yourself as a manager or operator. Do not do that. Do not make any effort to uncover the identity of the whistleblower or the mandated reporter. I cannot stress that enough. If it was an anonymous complaint, anonymous report that was made, it must remain anonymous. Any inkling of you trying to do that is a breach of trust, really shows poor of your integrity, and will only create more liabilities up and down the chain. Do not do that. Lastly, you will not bring back or return to work any employee that is suspected of the abuse or otherwise significantly involved in the incident without prior approval from licensing or the regional center or disability rights. Typically, it's licensing that will reserve judgment the longest, where regional center might be more responsive. But in either case, licensing kind of follows a 10-day rule. And if you don't know this, note this down. When an event happens of abuse, they give you the required hours to call it in, especially if there's no physical harm. They'll give you the 2 days, whatever the case may be, to report it. But they will assume that you will have called the cops within the first 24-hour period, and that they come out within a 24-hour period. That serves two purposes: to ensure the safety of the resident, but also to make sure that the operational location is safe for that LPA to visit, and there's no risk to their health and safety for them going in to investigate. So they usually come 2 days later to do the initial complaint or case management visit. Once they do that, they'll say it is continued enough, not enough data will be collected, more staff interviews will happen, and they'll do that within the third and all the way to 10 days before they usually come back to give you findings if it's a short investigation. It may take longer than that, but typically by day 10, they should, and 10 business days, by the way, so you're looking at pretty much 2 weeks, where they can give you a preliminary determination whether the person should come back or not. Do not execute a return to work without a written, stated in an email or notification that the person can be brought back. Do not do it. So what are the timelines for reporting an SIR? There's different timelines, so let's go into it. So typically, SIRs follow this rule: 24-hour verbal notice to parents, relatives, guardians, stakeholders, regional center compliance agencies, and a 48-hour written notice rule per Title 1722. However, when in doubt as to how to proceed, do as your regional center has dictated or is advising you to do so via their case management, client service, or quality assurance department. Note an example here: Alta Regional Center has very specific parameters. Let's take a quick look at them highlighted in red. The first one says that when it comes to typical SIRs, their expectation is that the written report is submitted within 24 hours of learning the incident. So they actually forego the 48-hour rule in the sense that they give you 24 hours to give them notice. But then from the moment you left that voicemail, you reached someone, not a voicemail. The moment you gave them notice of the event, a 24-hour window starts. Now, if you called them at hour 24 of the SIR, then that means, yes, 48 hours. But if you call them at hour 6, that just means you have a total of 30 hours to do the report, if you understand me. So again, once they become aware of it, they give you 24 hours to do the report. Okay, regardless of when you verbally reported it, regardless of the 24 and 48 typical 17 and 22, Alta wants it that way. As far as mandated reporting, when it comes to child abuse or suspected neglect of child abuse, you have 36 hours. You have 36 hours. It's right there. Within 36 hours of receiving the information concerning the incident, they need a report. When it comes to serious bodily harm because of a suspected abuse or neglect situation, they will tell you that they expect you to contact law enforcement immediately, and you have no more than 2 hours. No more than 2 hours. Just take 2 hours to do the report and turn it in. Also, at the same time, they expect you to give the report to the ombudsman and any other parties within those 2 hours. Period. If it doesn't end in serious bodily harm, and that means nothing above first aid, it wasn't sexual, because they consider sexual assault a serious bodily harm. If it wasn't seriously bodily harm or non-sexual, then they give you the 24 hours. Okay, 24 hours within having reported it, you got 24 hours to produce a report. The same with the ombudsman, the same timeline they give you to report to those other agencies as well. Okay. Now, here's the long-term care ombudsman's guidance on it. It typically follows the same thing, where they expect you to report things that result in serious bodily immediately to law enforcement and within 2 hours. No serious bodily injury within 24 hours. Law enforcement call, 24 hours report. And if it was caused by a resident to resident violent aggression, especially if the resident has dementia or some other condition that impairs judgment that did not involve bodily injury to the affected party, you call it in with to services as practically as possible to the lawn care ombudsman or law enforcement, and the report is 24 hours later. Okay. Here's a couple pro tips for you guys in terms of documenting the report. You never complete an LIC 627 unusual incident accidental injury form for a suspected abuse or neglect situation. Don't do it. It's not the proper form. Do not turn that in. However, you can complete the LIC 627 to document the law enforcement visit as a result of your call, but that's more of a follow-up to your SIR, and that can go along with your SIR. However, when it comes to mandated abuse and reporting, you'll always complete the SOC 341, whether it's the one for children or adults or seniors. You'll always fill out the SOC 341 for mandated or suspected abuse reporting. Disability Rights California, they have their own protocols for reporting. You can scan the QR code that's right here to give you the skinny on it. But basically, they have an online vendor report form. And for EBSH group, community crisis homes, and even SLS that may use CPI Advance or PROACT, they have a monthly restraint report that they have you fill out. In terms of their specific criteria for reporting to them an SIR, they want to know about alleged sexual assault by staff. They want to know about alleged physical abuse by staff. They want to know about serious injury or death due to a restraint or a seclusion that went wrong or, that was excessive. And lastly, they want to know about any unexpected or unexplained death. So Disability Rights California adds as a third layer of governance. Please, if you run an EBSH community crisis home or you are in a forensic SLS program, it behooves you to be aware of these requirements. So how do you document the SIR? Well, who, what, where, when, how, and why. So I took Alta because I found their provisions unique. So I did want to kind of specify that I'm not going to cover the red because we covered the red already. But the green information at the header of the SIR form is basically who, like who's documenting this report, from what agency, who, right? Again, who, what, where, when, how, and why. In the second part of the first page, you start talking about who is this report about, the individual, right? Their UCI, their time of incident. It gives you more, though there should be a little bit about when on there. It has to do with the client info, so I kept it color-coded. The medical information is regarding any treatment that was needed because of the event. So that's more of a what that was done. As far as the alleged perpetrator, that's again who, and that's a who matter, and so it's in green, and it specifies that person and the relationship to the individual that was affected. The next part, location of the incident, has to do with where, and so I put that in that magenta color to drive the point home. And then there's the vendor information, again, who was responsible during this event, what was the party, what kind of facility, what kind of program were they, so that you document that. And then what was done by the reporter, what agencies were contacted, the numbers, etc. Okay. And then again, it continues what agencies were contacted, and then you go into any law enforcement reporting that was done. So what was done, and then again, where, what kind of facility type is it, where, all that goes into that, additional details. And then when you talk about documenting the incident itself, you're talking about the like the who, what, where, when, how, why, but you're talking about what happened, basically. So I kept it blue as majority. It outlines the type of incidents, and you'll notice that the big six are on here. You'll see that suspected abuse and neglect are on there. Victim of the crime can fall under, obviously, abuse and neglect. You're talking about disease outbreak, choking. Those are change of conditions, right? Hospital admissions, change of conditions. You're talking about basically a lot of other incidents, which include injuries, fractures, falls, change of medical condition, things of that nature that are on here that are part of that big six. And finally, you talk about the description of the incident, and you talk about all the specifics that led up to and during the event with as much detail as you can, objectively, factually, honestly, no fluff. And then the yellow is important. Remember the why. So talking about what actions were taken, who was responsible, for what was the aim of that action, putting that all objectively is this is your chance to own the event and own the response and flush it out, spell it out, state it out. And lastly, what steps are going to be taken to prevent this incident from occurring again allows you to make the case as to what you did next to make sure what you're going to be doing going forward to make sure that this risk is managed, that the risk is mitigated, and this risk is prevented. So the SIR triage model, which is the last thing I'll touch on, it goes with the theory that all events happen in a continuity. And so typically when we have events that are difficult to manage, SIRs, that are of different types, we're always talking about detecting the event, responding to the event, recovering and helping the team recover through the event. We reassess after the event, the lessons learned, and then we put things in place to prevent it. And we're always going through this circle. We're always going through this model of managing the risk in our operation. And we should always be following this model. And you should be looking at your plans of intervention, plans of support, disaster plans, emergency plans. All these things that we have in place are there to manage the risk and maximize positive outcomes, because that is the best practice. You mitigate and manage risks by maximizing the planning, the preparation, and the resilience built through drills and exercises of your team to prevent adverse events. And by doing that, you are exercising best practices and ensuring the best quality of life for the people that you serve. So have a plan. Why? Because you're the key to your safety. You are the key. By doing that, you are preparing and prioritizing. You use the tools, policies, procedures, forms to drill, train, and build capacity for your team to respond to circumstances. You prioritize preparedness for life-threatening events and circumstances by doing that. You listen and you look. You observe your staff practices and give feedback often. You observe your residents for progress and setbacks often. You should be working with your consultants. Changing condition. Oh, he's losing too much weight. Oh, he's always grumpy around this time of day. Oh, he's actually hitting people now. Or he's spitting, or she is smearing or tearing off their clothing. These are continual assessments that in conversations you should be having. And you're only doing that if you're present, listening, and looking at what's happening in your operation and being connected to what's happening in your operation. You're always assessing and you're asking. You're conducting emergency drills yourself to see your responsiveness of your team. How well do they know the plan? How well can they execute evacuations or other plans of intervention? You're consulting with your district manager, your behavioral consultants, your medical consultants, and the compliance and training department for input, training, guidance, workshops, webinars, things like this to help edify and reaffirm and train your team. And then ultimately, as a leader, you're always negotiating and you're doing the necessary. Why? Because you need to cultivate effective communication and decision-making. Those two skills as a leader are your bread and butter. If you have, instill, and create a diligent intention to communicate with people with purpose and clarity, and you sharpen your ability to prioritize what needs to be first, making critical decisions in time of that, and communicating those decisions with clarity, you will have a strong team. I guarantee you that. That's the key, because you're the key. And by doing that, you make agreements. Yeah, sometimes some processes may be too much, and sometimes your staff just know a better way of dealing and coping and managing and working with your residents to avoid crises. Listen to them. Look at what they're doing. Collaborate them. But if any compromise, any collaboration that you do has to add value. It shouldn't subtract value. And lastly, health and safety trumps everything, guys and gals. So execute and lead accordingly. Have a plan. Because by taking ownership of it all, you build a culture of ownership in your operations. And you do that, and the life, safety, security, wellness, and thriving of your residents become a priority because everyone has stable, strong practices in operation, the best practices in operation, and prevent a widespread issues that can become special incidents. Special incidents can happen at any time. A special incident is a decision or a lack of decision away. So yes, it is manageable, but it begins and ends with you. So remember, as a leader, you own the role and not the title. You own the responsibility, but definitely not the excuses. And you own the relationships that build success in your team, but not your preferences, so no favorites. You build up your entire team, not part of your team. Any questions, please email me at ctrivia@redwindfamilycarenetwork.com. It's been my pleasure to provide this training to give you some insight on special incident reporting, mandated reporting, the SIR triage model, and just the things to be cognizant of in terms of your role and responsibility as a leader in managing the risks that can come to bear and negatively affect your population.